Imagine creating one of the fastest growing products in human history, a product used by hundreds of millions of people, a company valued at hundreds of billions of dollars, a company backed by some of the most powerful investors on Earth. Now imagine that every time someone uses your product, you lose money. Not because your business is failing, not because customers aren't paying, but because the technology itself is so expensive that even billions of dollars may not be enough. This is the strange reality of OpenAI, the company behind ChatGPT, a company racing to build the future while burning through money at a rate that would bankrupt most businesses on Earth. And the deeper you look, the crazier the story becomes. Because most people think they understand what OpenAI is: a chatbot, a writing tool, a search engine replacement. They're wrong. OpenAI isn't a product. It's a declaration of war. A war against every major technology company on the planet. A war against the limits of what machines can do. And some would argue, a war against the pace at which the rest of humanity was willing to move. The people running it aren't trying to win a market. They're trying to own the next era of human civilization. And they are burning billions of dollars every year to do it. So here's the only question that matters. Can they survive long enough to win? To understand how we got here, you have to go back to one specific night. November 30th, 2022. A Wednesday. Inside OpenAI's San Francisco offices, a small team quietly pushes a button. No press conference, no advertising campaign, no countdown clock, just a live link. And within hours, something unprecedented begins to happen. People start sharing it, sending it to colleagues, texting it to family members at midnight. You have to try this. Within 5 days, 1 million people had signed up. Let that mean something for a moment. Netflix took 3.5 years to reach 1 million users. Instagram, the app that defined a generation, took 2.5 months. Spotify took 5 months. ChatGPT did it in 5 days. And then it didn't stop. By January 2023, just 2 months after launch, 100 million people were using it. 100 million. That had never happened before in the entire history of the internet. Not Facebook, not TikTok, not YouTube, not any platform ever built. Nothing had ever spread like this. The financial world reacted immediately. Google's stock dropped in a single day. Microsoft, which had already made a quiet, early bet on OpenAI, watched its investment become the most talked about deal in Silicon Valley overnight. Tech executives who had spent years casually dismissing AI suddenly found themselves on emergency calls with their boards. And the word disruption, overused, tired, nearly meaningless, suddenly had weight again. But inside all that noise, all those headlines, all those "this changes everything" takes, nobody was asking the one question that actually mattered. What was it costing to serve all those people? Because the numbers happening behind the scenes were about to become the most important numbers in the history of modern business. Here's something almost nobody thinks about. Every time you open ChatGPT and type a message, every time you watch that cursor blink and wait for a response, you're not just using software. You're pulling on a thread that runs to a warehouse. Somewhere, probably in Texas or Iowa or Virginia, there is a building the size of several football fields. No windows. Industrial fans running at full power. The air thick with heat. And inside that building, row after row of machines are doing something extraordinary. They are thinking. For you, right now. Billions of mathematical calculations per second just to finish your sentence. And every single one of those calculations costs real money. Not much per message. A few cents maybe. But here's where the math turns sinister. Multiply a few cents by hundreds of millions of users. Multiply that by the dozens of messages each user sends per session. Multiply that by every hour of every day. And what you get isn't a technology company. It's a machine that eats money. Estimates from the early months after launch suggested OpenAI was spending close to $700,000 per day just to keep the service running. Read that again. $700,000 every single day, before a single new improvement, before new research, before salaries, offices, or any ordinary cost of running a company, just to exist. And that doesn't include what it costs to build the model in the first place. Training GPT-4, the engine that made ChatGPT feel genuinely intelligent, is estimated to have cost around $100 million. One model, one training run, gone, before a single user ever typed a single word. But here's what makes this even more alarming. These costs don't stay flat. Because OpenAI isn't trying to maintain what it has. It's chasing something far more ambitious. Something it calls AGI, Artificial General Intelligence. Not software that retrieves information. Not a system that predicts the next word in a sentence. A machine that actually thinks, that reasons, that solves problems the way a human mind does. And eventually, solves problems no human mind can. To build that, you need hardware. Staggering, almost incomprehensible quantities of hardware. Hardware that comes from exactly one place. One company. A company that never built a chatbot, never trained a language model, never competed in the AI race directly, and still made more money from this boom than anyone else on the planet. California, 1849. 100,000 men abandon their lives and head west to find gold. Most of them find nothing. A few get rich. But the people who made money regardless, whether gold was found or not, were the ones selling the shovels. Jensen Huang understood this before almost anyone. While every AI lab was racing to build more powerful models, NVIDIA was building the one thing they all needed, a chip called the H100 GPU. The engine that makes modern AI possible. It costs around $30,000 per chip, and the major AI labs don't need one. They don't need 1,000. OpenAI needs tens of thousands just to function. Some estimates put the number far higher. There's one catch. NVIDIA is the only company making them at the scale and precision the frontier labs need. Intel has tried. AMD has tried. A dozen well-funded startups have tried. None of them have caught up, which means NVIDIA doesn't just compete in the AI industry. It sits above it, collecting a toll from every single company running in the race. And when ChatGPT lit the world on fire, that toll became extraordinary. In 2024, NVIDIA crossed $100 billion in annual revenue. Not lifetime value, not paper gains. $100 billion in 1 year. Its profit margins became the envy of every executive in technology. Its stock rose over 200% in 12 months. And Jensen Huang, who had spent 3 decades quietly building a chip company most people couldn't name, became one of the most powerful figures in the global economy almost overnight. But here's the brutal reality for OpenAI. Every time it builds a better model, it has to buy more chips. More chips means more cash leaving the building. More cash leaving the building means a wider gap between revenue and cost. And NVIDIA has every incentive to hold its prices exactly where they are. Because Google needs those chips. Amazon needs them. Meta needs them. Every major AI company on Earth is paying the same toll to the same landlord. NVIDIA isn't a vendor to the AI industry. It's the infrastructure, and the rent only moves in one direction. Now, you might think, surely OpenAI can outrun this. Grow fast enough. Build a big enough lead that the costs become manageable. Maybe, if it were running alone, but it isn't. And the war it's fighting on the other side makes the NVIDIA problem look almost simple. In early 2023, a document leaked out of Google. It was never meant to leave the building, but it did. And when the technology industry read what it said, the room went very quiet. The memo was blunt. Google admitted that it did not have a defensible moat in AI, and neither did OpenAI. That the walls around their technology, built over years at the cost of billions, were thinner than anyone had publicly admitted. Let that land for a second. OpenAI had just created the fastest growing product in human history. 100 million users, billions in funding, a 2-year head start on almost everyone. And one of the most powerful technology companies on Earth was saying, it won't be enough, because the war had already begun. Google launched Gemini, built on decades of proprietary search data and the most sophisticated AI research division ever assembled. Meta released Llama, open source, free, downloadable by anyone on the planet, backed by a company printing over $150 billion a year in revenue. Amazon poured billions into Anthropic, a company founded to build exactly what OpenAI was building, started by former OpenAI executives who had walked out the door. Microsoft had put $13 billion into OpenAI, while simultaneously building AI into its own product ecosystem, quietly making sure it never had to fully depend on anyone. And China entered the race with government backing, national urgency, and no intention of finishing second. Every major technology power in the world sprinting in the same direction. Now here's the asymmetry that should have kept Sam Altman awake at night. OpenAI's rivals weren't just more numerous. They were structurally immune to the pressure OpenAI was under. Google earns over $300 billion a year from advertising alone. Meta earns over $150 billion. Amazon generates more still. These companies can fund AI as a rounding error on their income statements. They can absorb a decade of losses without flinching. OpenAI cannot, and yet it kept moving. GPT-4, then GPT-4o, then o1, then a relentless sequence of new releases, each one more powerful, more expensive, more technically demanding than the last. By 2024, the losses had grown to an estimated $5 billion in a single year. $5 billion. And still, somehow, the company was standing, still building, still spending, still in the race. How? Let's put the numbers on the table. In 2024, OpenAI was projected to earn around $4 billion in revenue. For most companies, $4 billion is a triumph, a career, a legacy. For OpenAI, it was a slow disaster unfolding in plain sight, because its costs were approaching $10 billion, a gap of $6 billion every 12 months, widening. Now here's what makes this different from an ordinary struggling startup. OpenAI isn't losing money because of bad decisions. It isn't losing money because the product doesn't work. It's losing money because of what the product has to do every time someone uses it. Think about the trap. To keep users, OpenAI has to keep improving the model. To improve the model, it has to use more compute. More compute means a higher cost per query. Higher cost per query, multiplied across hundreds of millions of users, means losing more money every single day. To justify charging more, the product has to be better. To make it better, you spend more, which widens the gap, which requires more revenue, which requires a better product, which costs more, around and around. A spiral that gets faster the harder you run. The only exit is scale. Massive, almost incomprehensible scale. The theory, and it's a theory worth taking seriously, is that at some point, paying customers multiply fast enough that revenue begins to outpace cost. The infrastructure investment pays off. Hardware gets cheaper as the semiconductor industry catches up. The marginal cost of serving each additional user eventually falls, and the math flips. It's not an absurd theory. Amazon ran at a loss for years while Wall Street waited. Eventually, the economics turned, and what followed became one of the greatest business stories in modern history. But Amazon's path required one thing above all: time. And for a company losing $1 billion every few months, time is not free. Time costs money, which meant OpenAI had to keep going back to investors, again and again, asking for billions more. And here's the part of this story that genuinely defies easy explanation. They kept saying yes. If you want to understand the forces shaping the future of technology, business, and power, consider subscribing. Now, let's continue. Late 2023, OpenAI closes a funding round. Valuation, $86 billion. 6 months later, it raises again, $100 billion. By 2025, $300 billion. $300 billion. For a company that has never produced a single dollar of profit. Think about who is writing these checks. Not retail investors swept up in a news cycle. Not tourists chasing a trend. Sovereign wealth funds. Institutional capital allocators. Some of the most analytically rigorous, most coldly disciplined investors in the history of financial markets. And they are competing with each other for the right to give money to a company that is, by every conventional financial measure, a spectacular ongoing loss. Why? Because they believe something that most people haven't fully let themselves believe yet. They believe that whoever controls artificial general intelligence controls the economic infrastructure of the 21st century, not just the AI industry, the entire economy. The way electricity didn't merely power light bulbs, it restructured civilization. If AGI arrives, and the people closest to the research believe increasingly that it will, the company that controls the most capable version of it sits at the center of every industry on Earth, not as a vendor, not as a service provider, as the foundation everything else is built on: healthcare, finance, law, manufacturing, defense, education, scientific research. Microsoft understood this earlier than most. Its $13 billion investment bought a 49% share of OpenAI's commercial profits, and the right to embed that technology into every product in its portfolio. Word, Excel, Azure, Teams, Outlook, hundreds of millions of business users, all running on OpenAI's engine. That integration alone could be worth more than the entire investment many times over in the coming decade. For every other investor, the logic is starker. If AGI is real, the cost of not betting is unthinkable. The downside of investing and being wrong is painful. The downside of not investing and being right is something you spend the rest of your career trying to explain away. And then there's Sam Altman himself, who has, to his credit, never hidden what he needs. At one point, and this is not an exaggeration, this actually happened, Altman floated the idea of raising $7 trillion. $7 trillion. More than the annual GDP of Japan. To rebuild the global semiconductor industry from the ground up. To ensure that the AI era never gets bottlenecked by chip supply. Most people heard that number and assumed it was theater. It wasn't. Because Altman understands something that the rest of the world is only beginning to process. If AI becomes what he believes it will become, the physical infrastructure required to run it will dwarf everything humanity has ever built. More data centers than currently exist on Earth. More energy consumption than entire continents currently produce. A global supply chain that reshapes geopolitics the way oil shaped the 20th century. That is what the money is for. That is the scale of the bet being placed, which leaves us with the only question that still matters. How does this end? There are 3 ways this story resolves. 3 futures that the smartest people in the world are arguing about right now. The one that happens will determine more about the next 100 years than almost any other event in our lifetimes. Future 1. OpenAI wins. The costs come down. The revenue scales. The models become so capable, so deeply woven into the daily operations of global business, that the revenue becomes unstoppable. Companies pay hundreds of billions to license the technology. Governments build national infrastructure around it. Hospitals and law firms and banks and research labs all run on OpenAI's foundation. The company completes its transformation from nonprofit research experiment into the most commercially powerful technology company in history. And the investors who were quietly ridiculed for writing checks at a $300 billion valuation into a money-losing AI lab collect returns that rewrite the record books. This future is possible. It's the future that justifies every decision, every dollar, every sleepless night. But it requires almost everything to go right, simultaneously, for years. No critical regulatory crackdown, no catastrophic infrastructure failure, no competitor breakthrough that makes OpenAI's architecture obsolete 6 months before the economics turn. No funding drought that arrives just before the math flips. Everything has to hold, all at once, for a very long time. Future 2. The race ends in a draw. Google, Meta, and Amazon don't just keep up with OpenAI. They match it, model for model, release for release. And open source AI, built by the global research community, free to download, free to run, becomes powerful enough that most businesses simply stop paying for ChatGPT altogether. The moat disappears. Not because OpenAI failed, but because the thing it built turned out to be replicable by anyone with the right resources. And in a world where powerful AI is free, you cannot charge a premium for it. Prices collapse. Revenue stalls. The unit economics, already brutal, become irreparable. OpenAI survives in this future, but as something smaller, quieter, and far less world-altering than it once threatened to become. A company that started a revolution and watched others collect the profit. Future 3. The system breaks. This is the one nobody says out loud at conferences. The capital runs dry before the revenue catches up. A geopolitical event disrupts the semiconductor supply chain the entire AI industry depends on. A regulatory moment arrives in Washington, in Brussels, in Beijing, that changes the economics overnight. Or a competitor releases something so dramatically more capable that OpenAI's technology becomes obsolete before the business ever reaches viability. And OpenAI doesn't struggle, it collapses. The aftermath, what happens to the models, the intellectual property, the people, the relationship with Microsoft, creates a shockwave across the technology industry that nobody has a playbook for. This is not the likely future. But here's what prevents anyone from fully dismissing it. Every single person inside OpenAI knows it's possible. And that knowledge, that specific fear, explains everything about how the company operates. The urgency, the pace, the spending that looks reckless from the outside. It isn't reckless. It's the behavior of people who understand exactly what happens if they slow down. Here is what makes this story unlike almost any other in the history of business. The stakes are not financial. Not really. OpenAI isn't fighting for a share of the search market. It isn't competing for advertising revenue or monthly subscribers. It is attempting, openly, explicitly, without apology, to build technology that changes what it means to be human. That restructures the global labor market. That accelerates scientific discovery by decades. That shifts the balance of power between nations in ways that make the internet era look like a warm-up act. And it is doing this while losing billions of dollars a year. While waging a war on 5 fronts simultaneously. While navigating governments that are beginning to treat AI not as a product, but as a strategic weapon. While managing internal fractures so deep that its own board once tried to remove its CEO over a weekend, and failed, in a drama that stunned the business world and still isn't fully understood. While being watched and competed against by every major technology power on Earth. The central paradox of this story is this. OpenAI's greatest strength and its greatest vulnerability are the exact same thing. The ambition. The willingness to move faster, spend more, and bet bigger than anyone else is the only reason it matters. And it is also the reason it might not survive. The money will run out unless the revenue catches up. And the revenue might not catch up in time. That is not inevitable. It is not certain. But it is real. And what is also real is this. The next few years will answer one of the most consequential questions in the history of capitalism. Can you spend your way to owning the future? Can you absorb years of catastrophic losses, building something so important that being right, eventually, is enough to survive? Or does the future belong to whoever has the deepest pockets? Not the sharpest technology, not the boldest vision, just the capital to outlast everyone else until the others quit. OpenAI is betting everything that vision wins, that speed wins, that the future belongs to whoever gets there first. The race is on, the money is burning, and the world, whether it fully understands it yet or not, is already living inside the outcome. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to subscribe. We publish documentaries on AI, business, technology, and power. Thank you for watching.